Do you know what she said?
Let them eat cake.
Who took the bomb?
We're getting screwed, man. Every time we turn around, we're getting screwed. Oh, the revolution's going to be through podcasting for sure. That's the only way we talk. It's the little guys that take the brunt of everything. It's got to stop. Peasants, man. We're just peasants. Every one of us. You watch those old movies, you see the peasants in the background with the kings and queens walking around. We're those people. We're those people. Good morning, peasants. I gotta make sure all my microphones are on and everything. I don't have audio feedback here. I'm just talking into what feels like an empty room. So I hope you guys can hear me. If I can get an audio check 5x5, if I'm good or not, that'd be great. And good morning. I'm glad you guys are here with us again today. Again, broadcasting from home. Ron is out of town, having all kinds of technical difficulties. He's trying to tune in, and he's probably listening right now in the chat. So maybe he'll drop in and say hi. We'll see. Oh, forgive me. I'm already getting to the sip. And that's not fair to you guys, because I know why you show up bright and early. You show up for the simultaneous sip. So I can't get out ahead of you guys. I got to wait for you. So I know why you came. You came for the simultaneous sip. And all you need for that is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, a chalice, a stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure of the dopamine hit of the day. The thing that makes everything better, the unparalleled sip, and it starts right now. Oh, and usually we have a little something for that, right? Good gravy. I'm going to have to figure out my...
So we're going to put up on the screen a few of the things that are part of your platform. And I want to ask you, just give me sort of a true or false on these. Abolish the Senate.
True.
Okay. Replace the presidency and Supreme Court as we now know them.
Yep.
Abolish ICE.
Absolutely.
Abolish borders and give amnesty to anyone currently in the U.S. illegally.
As a long-term plan, yep.
Defund the Pentagon.
Absolutely.
Abolish prisons, at least in large part.
Yeah, again, that as part of a long-term program, yeah.
Okay, so no prisons. Government or public ownership of most large corporations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to put up on the screen a few of the things that are part of your platform. And I want to ask you, just give me...
So, can you believe that? So what are the things? Replace the president and the Supreme Court with executive and judiciary. So she goes down the list. That's the Democratic Socialists of America. That's their official platform. That's their spokesperson. That's like the equivalent of the DNC, like the Tea Party will have a chairman, like these little subgroups that are part of the coalition of the two big governing parties. That is freaking hilarious. Like, that's kind of one of those things. Again, hey, listen, they're telling you outright exactly who they are. Don't be surprised when they are exactly who they tell you that they are. So we've got quite a few listeners out in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin got hit with a devastating tornado yesterday. Look at the images here of what is going on. Look at the images here. This is really sad out there. So I saw some of the images of the storm. Can't really see much. It's just, horizontal wind and rain and like very low visibility conditions. But this is out in Wisconsin. Got hit with a tornado yesterday. It's devastating. Imagine being from that neighborhood. That whole neighborhood is just tore apart. That is so sad. So sad. I can't say in my little experience I have ever seen devastation quite that concentrated. That's pretty rough. Still no sound check. Can somebody give me a sound check? Make sure you can hear me. Oh, and I got the hiccups. Great. Okay, this next story. I'm sorry, you guys. I got the hiccups. So this next story here, this is a follow-up on this Daryl Dogs story. So this is a local story that's been going on. And what happened was a gentleman from Predator Poachers named Alex Rosen. Alex Rosen showed up And Ron Cleaver says, sounds good on the sound check. And Mark in 967 says, good morning. Good morning. You have the hiccups. Yes, I do. I got the hiccups. Okay, so this gentleman, Alex Rosen, through his predator poachers program, right? They basically are entrapping people online. Say what you want about it. They're finding people who have a predilection to chat with underage kids and, invite them to meet up. And so after chatting with them, they'll set up a meetup and they have a decoy and they show up at the house or the meetup house or whatever. And they usually call the police, and it's a whole thing. And they have put away, I don't know about Alex Rosen specifically, but at least someone else that does the exact same thing he does. There's half dozen of them on X and, YouTube and stuff that have these predator poacher channels. And anyways, they came out to Daryl Dogs' house because he was chatting with the decoy online. And we watched the video. We watched clips of the video. We talked about it. We were very enraged by the situation. Well, the Bremerton Police Department, aside from never prosecuting anybody for these crimes, which is odd in and of itself, but it's a whole separate topic, they dropped this Daryl Dogs case so that, no charges are pending. And so apparently in the process of this whole thing, somebody out in Georgia confessed to being the person that was decoy chatting with the decoy, pretending to be Daryl Dogs. So I saw that report coming from a gentleman named M. Adams Unchained on X. I didn't see Alex Rosen remove any of his original posts about Daryl Dogs, but this right here is from Adams. And he says, Daryl Dogs claims to be a victim of swatting after he signed on to a lawsuit against POTUS Donald Trump. And this is from the police report. So this is from the police report itself. I called and spoke with Leslie Dogs. Leslie is the wife. Leslie provided the phone to Daryl. I explained to Daryl that we would not be able to return his electronic devices to him. Daryl explained that he believed he was being doxxed for political reasons. Daryl stated that he had signed on to several lawsuits against President Trump. So, us locals here in Kitsap County, there's an employee in Kitsap County that is not elected. He's a hired employee, and he's suing the president. Daryl believed Pedophilia Poacher is a political organization. I don't really think they are at all, actually. I think they're just doing what they say they're doing. I had already reviewed their recent posts as I was advised of this call during the watch change by Sergeant Nelson. I did not notice anything overtly political about their operation. I advised Daryl that the details did not appear to be politically motivated, and BPD would still need to complete the investigation. Daryl went on to ask if I knew what a responding officer told him would resolve the incident. I said something to the effect of, he asked to photograph your penis. Daryl confirmed that this was what was said. I told Daryl that a picture of that was similar to a scar or tattoo and would typically not be something without images circulating on the internet. I was noted during my time as a detective and how such a request would not be unusual. Daryl also noted that he was a federal election official and his personal phone contained voter information, appearing to indicate we were not privy to the information. I noted the warrant would be specific to the information we have evidence for. Okay, so apparently Daryl Dogs is innocent. Let's start with that. And if this is an entrapment scheme by some higher political outlet or organization or the RNC or something like that, it's absolutely despicable. I tend to not think that's the case. I tend to think, I don't know what I think here, because apparently someone else has taken the heat out in Georgia for having been the one that did these chats. And I don't know if the police found anything on their phone, but this stunning admission here that he is a federal election official. So he acknowledges, first and foremost, Carlitos, howdy y'all. First and foremost, he acknowledges he's a federal election official as a county level employee. So first and foremost, if anybody ever says, well, the Save America Act can't do this, or that's not federal, or states run their elections, he's claiming to be a federal election official. And his personal phone, not his company phone, not his office email, not an issued by the government piece of property. His personal phone has private voter information. What if he got fired? Now his personal phone has private voter information and he's a scorned employee. And does the county know that that personal information is on his phone? For heaven's sake, this guy signed on to lawsuits against the Trump administration to prevent them from looking at voter rolls, which he claims is just happens to something of that nature happens to be on his private phone. China, if you're listening, Daryl Dogs has got the info. I'm sure his phone is easy to hack. Anyways, don't know the rest of the story here. Daryl Dogs, innocent man, proven till, guilty. Apparently they've dropped that case. So that's just, I don't know. I don't know what to think of it. I mean, I was pretty enraged at the whole Daryl Dogs situation, but apparently I didn't need to be. Apparently, someone in Georgia is actually the person. I don't know. I don't know what Alex Rosen's take on that is. I haven't seen any statements from him, but that's pretty stunning. Okay, so next thing, up in Alaska, right? Big old state of Alaska. When I think of Alaska, I think that it's a conservative state. I never in my mind think, oh, Alaska's really blue. Now, I guess if I consider like blue dog Democrats, union workers, I could get there. This is a clip from a gentleman who's running for Congress. He's up in Alaska and he's being asked about the Save America Act. Listen to the talking point here, right? Like, oh, women won't be able to vote, so screw the illegals who are trying to vote. It's crazy.
Anything we do to limit access to voting, we're on the wrong side of history. We need to expand voting access. And if we want to make changes to our voting system, it should not be in fear of the coming election. It should be done in a thoughtful manner, and it should be put out 6 to 8 years so that people can contemplate all the impacts it's going to have on population, specifically women voters that the SAVE Act, I think, targets. We need to be careful with that. So I'm for a very cautious approach in changing how we vote.
Including women voters. Think about that for a second, right? The SAVE Act we want to do it 6 to 8 years in advance. Okay. And we want to be really thoughtful. That sounds fair. That sounds like a fair broker of information. But the premise, we got to be careful, like, especially the impact on women voters. Guys, can we get over that now? Like, is there really going to be an impact on women voters? Do you think women are so incompetent that they can open a bank account, get their driver's licenses switched over, get all of their accounts changed over to their married name, have no problem doing that? But when it comes to registering to vote, oh my goodness, that's just over the top. I wonder how many women out there officially change their name, like take on their husband's name, believe they took on their husband's name, present themselves as taking on their husband's name, and never change their driver's license. I bet you it's a tiny fraction of women that do that. If you go through all the effort of getting a marriage license, having a marriage, right, changing over your bank accounts and everything, of course you're going to get a driver's license. It's part of the process. How else would you change over most of those accounts? You think you're really presenting your birth certificate everywhere? Not usually. Usually you go change your driver's license, then you go change all the accounts. It's like the process. Thundering Oak, no, we wouldn't shut up about it. I don't know what you wouldn't shut up about. You're going to have to remind me what that is. Anyways, it's just another one of those, like, these people are out of their minds. The DSA wants to defund prisons, defund cops, replace the presidency, replace the Supreme Court, create, Soviet-style committees over everything. They're saying it out loud. It's super obvious. And then there's this. So we've mentioned this multiple times over the course of the show, multiple times. The Democrat National Committee is broke, or it's actually technically called the Democrat National Convention. They're totally broke. Okay, so here we are, 100-ish days away from the midterms. You've got a broke DNC. You've got DSA members who are running under the Democrat flag that are talking about the most ridiculous policies. There's a huge fracture inside of the Democrat Party right now. But yet, they're just going to take the midterms, and you've got the Republicans that are so concerned about the midterms, and I don't know, we might not be able to win. Listen to this from Joe in the Mornings with Joe. Or was that what the show called? Morning Joe? Morning Joe, that's what it's called. Morning Joe and his wife, Mika Brzezinski, talking about the RNC's or the DNC's money troubles.
7 minutes past the top of the hour, there is new reporting
This has to be a
morning
DNC story.
on the dire financial situation for the Democratic National Committee. Now less than 100 days until the midterm elections. The New York Times reports the Democratic Party is so short on cash that leaders are asking vendors not to send bills until after the midterm elections. The paper spoke to 3 people briefed on the move who called it a bookkeeping maneuver. The paper highlights a cash disparity between the two parties, noting that President Trump controls a $400 million super PAC. The Republican National Committee is sitting on nearly $130 million, while the DNC is $2 million in debt.
Yeah.
The news outlet Notice also has new reporting on the DNC putting its physical headquarters up for collateral last year in order to obtain a $15 million line of credit
this is just
to
so
help
pathetic.
invest in off-year elections.
This is so pathetic.
You hear? Do you hear Joe in the background? Oh, this is so pathetic. This is so pathetic. So the DNC had to put up their headquarters last year in order to, collateralize the loan they took out. And now they're completely broke. Like asking vendors not to send bills until next year. They're so broke. That is pretty stunning. So Anna Paulina Luna was on with Finnerty, can never say his name. He was she was on Newsmax, and she's talking about Leader Thune and the Save America Act. Okay, so the DNC's out of money. They've got crazy candidates. And the RNC, and it's not just that the DNC's out of money, it's that the DNC is out of money, and the RNC is loaded with money. They have more money by a factor of 4 than the Democrats, but yet Leader Thune is still concerned about Republicans facing a hard vote up against the midterms. What are we talking about here? A hard vote on something that 75% of the country or more support?
Let me ask you, what do you think John Thune is going to do with the Save America Act once it gets to the Senate?
Well, there's certain things that the House is trying to do specifically with monetary incentivizing and reconciliation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's an enforcement clause. And I really think that John Thune is hiding behind the filibuster because he doesn't want to put, and this is what I've heard directly, he doesn't want to put his members in a tough position right before a midterm with a tough vote. So that should just go to show how out of touch the Senate is, because voter ID is literally a 90-10 issue. And I don't really think that the Senate, aside from a few, really represents what the interests of the American people are.
I think that's just it, right? The Senate doesn't really represent what the American people are really trying to get at here. So exactly how tough a vote would this be? How tough a vote would this be for the Republicans right before the midterms? So let's check in with our friend Harry Enton, right? One of the best. So here we go. This is Harry Enton over at CNN, and he's got one of their polls, right? What are the chances of Republicans winning the midterm? Keep in mind, John Thune is preventing the SAVE Act in any form from coming to the House floor. He went on with Sean Hannity yesterday or the day before and basically claimed there were 15 out of 20 Republicans in the Senate that they interviewed and talked to that said that they wouldn't vote to get rid of the filibuster because blah, 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 whatever their reasons, okay? So he's protecting those 15 senators because they don't want to take this unpopular vote right before the midterms. What would the vote cost you, Harry Enton?
You know what? I would argue the biggest red flag that Democrats have, the biggest red flag, look at this. It's apathy, not believing that Democrats can change anything. Because the impacts of Democratic policies on your cost of living, only 41% say help, hurt, or wouldn't change it. The clear majority, nearly 3 in 5, 59%. So look, these are all the red flags. If in fact Democrats can't take back control of either the House and or the Senate, and if Trump can stop them, this is what's going on.
That's what's going on. And he goes on inside of that same clip there. He goes on to talk about how the Democrat Party is not seen as being trusted on the war in Iran, and they're not seen as being trusted on the economy or anything. So it's like, what are Republicans really afraid of here? What are they really afraid of? The Democrat Party has been doing this to themselves for a long time. They've been isolating, and they have been excluding large portions of the American population, specifically whites, right? And specifically white males. I mean, they've gotten, I hate to say it this way, but the Democrat Party got so far left and they got so extreme that they lost white gay men. Okay, they didn't just lose white straight men. They lost a lot of white gay men, okay, in the process of going so far to the left. And a lot of this was donor driven. So there was a former Democrat Party fundraiser, I don't know what you call this, bundler or whatever it is, operative, that kind of is coming out on Jesse Waters' show as kind of a whistleblower. And she's talking about how the George Soros and the Democrats control everything through the donations. And in fact, George Soros was so specific that he would only donate money to groups that were not being run by white men.
Is it the donors that are driving this craziness? It's a combination of the donors and the consultants. I would see the craziest things behind the scenes. It is so much worse than you can ever imagine. The public doesn't know this, but George Soros' organization actually put out a directive around 2020, 2021 that said that they were only going to donate to organizations led by non-white leaders for the next 5 years. I personally saw people that didn't get jobs because of this policy. Organizations were terrified of losing their funding. It completely changed the leadership class in the Democratic Party.
Is it the donors that are driving this craziness?
It's a combination.
The Democrat Party. That's another one of this is one of those reveals that we get every now and then. The entire Democrat Party has been shaped by the donors, and the donors can't smurf their money into the DNC anymore, or at least not the way they used to be able to, which is one of the key reasons why they're out of money. George Soros can't give $1 billion and watch it get split up in $15 donations left and right, right? So that's a really big deal. And Americans have completely lost trust in the institutions and in the DNC. It's really down to just those that are infected with TDS. There was this really great, it was about 5 minutes long. And I hate to play clips that are more than 2 or 3 minutes. They can kind of drag on a little bit. I am going to play one today, though, a little bit later about Russia. So, get ready for it. But I've got this clip. It's 5 or 6 minutes long, and it's a man on the street. He's going through a college campus. I don't remember what college. It was a liberal college. And he's asking a bunch of blacks and women's and just everybody that he can, will stop and talk to him. He's giving them a political survey. And, do you support this? And it's all policy oriented. And so the people answer their questions. And at the end, he goes, okay, you're 60% Republican, or you're 70% Republican, or you're 80% Republican. Pretty much every single person that he interviewed all introduced themselves as Democrat, all introduced themselves as liberal. When he actually had them take a political spectrum survey, they 100% became Republicans, like we're Republicans. And so the kids were open-minded. They thought it was kind of funny. They're like, oh, I'm going to have to rethink some of this. I didn't realize that, I aligned so much with Republicans. I didn't know, I thought Republicans were bad. Like they had the zeitgeist thing going on. And that's where the Democrats are at. Unless you're victim of the vote blue, no matter who mind virus, and you're infected with TDS, if you can see things from just a generic common sense point of view, right? It's what Stephen Miller says. We're not arguing over tax policy and minor policy nuance. We're talking about freedom and liberty, and versus slavery and captivity. Like we are talking capitalism and free market and personal choice and independence on, your commercial behavior versus complete and total control of not just the money supply, but the economy, regulation, the whole thing, the whole kit and caboodle. And so we have to be really careful with where things are going. And we have to be really careful about where we've been. And we have to hold people accountable who have abused our trust. One of the people that abused our trust, probably more than almost anybody else, was Dr. Fauci, right? During the COVID era, which gave rise to this show. If it hadn't been for COVID, Peasants' Perspective wouldn't have been born. Had a little bit of extra time off work, right? Had some time home. Actually, I think we started it a little bit before COVID really was roaring. Maybe it wasn't. I can't remember. I'd have to go look and see when the first broadcast upload was. But either way, it was largely inspired by COVID, because I really did feel like at that point I was, 37, 38 years old. And, I was old enough that I'd seen enough of the world that I knew that something was majorly wrong. Not a little wrong, majorly wrong. I knew we were being lied to. And yesterday, Anthony Fauci's, what's being described as his diary, was released. And there was a series of things that came out, and Robert Kennedy Jr. did an interview with Laura Ingraham. We're going to play multiple clips from this interview. I want to look back a little bit and just observe the Anthony Fauci effect. What was Anthony Fauci? How was he fed into the narrative? And how did his personal shortcomings make him, at minimum, a useful idiot for the Chinese Communist Party and the nefarious forces that are trying to destroy our country? So here's Robert Kennedy Jr. talking about the Anthony Fauci diaries. And we're going to hear multiple times from him.
You asked about the diaries. And we produced these, it took us about 8 months to dig these out of 11 separate servers. where they had been sequestered and secreted, and we handed them over this week to Rand Paul and Ron Johnson because they already have ongoing investigations and should see this. But I think the starkest impression that you get from reading these diaries is this massive dichotomy between what he was saying privately and what he was simultaneously saying publicly. He says in his diaries on January 30th that the Wuhan lab could not possibly be the source of the virus.
Oh, we know that was all
and
false.
Then, well, we all know it, but now his diary, he says he knew that, and yet for 2 years he told us that was.
But he was given.
You asked about the diary.
For 2 years, he knew the truth, and he refused to tell the American people. And I think that is what just really gets people so frustrated about Anthony Fauci was he knew the truth. And that's now that we see his private writings, we know that he was bold-faced lying to us. And this was enabled. How was it enabled? It was enabled by the media, by this. Every time Anthony Fauci came on TV, this is how he was introduced.
The single most respected voice in the pandemic, it's Dr. Anthony Fauci.
The man who's become known as America's doctor. The nation's top infectious disease expert, Anthony Fauci.
You are seen to many as a superhero.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, American hero and New York Yankee fan.
You've done so much for this country in terms of this crisis, so I really appreciate your insight.
Who better to give us answers that we can trust than Dr. Anthony Fauci?
The perfect person to answer our questions today. Joining us now, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, appreciate your candor. Dr. Fauci, appreciate the candor.
We appreciate your service to this country.
We appreciate your service.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
Greatly appreciate your service to America.
Thank you for your 37 years of service, I believe, to 7 presidents, and thank you for your work over the past year.
The great news is you're sticking around in the Biden administration. We are so grateful to you, Dr. Fauci, for everything you do.
Thank you so much for everything you do.
Thank you very much for everything that you do.
Thanks so much for the work that you do.
Thank you very much for the reassurance and, as always, for all of your public service. Thank you, Dr. Fauci.
So that's what we got from Dr. Fauci, right? Every time he was introduced, we got this sycophantic type love affair with legacy media and Dr. Fauci. And what do we know? We know Dr. Fauci, he was covering things up in the background, right? Not only did he know the truth, he knew that the virus didn't originate in the wet market, but then he propagated the wet market. In fact, he solicited articles to be able to be published in serious, previously credible medical journals in order to propagate this idea that the virus came from the wet market, thereby essentially obfuscating responsibility to the Wuhan the Wuhan lab, which would have tied back to Anthony Fauci and COVID Health Alliance and the gain of function research that had been banned that they were using China to get around, right? Like all of that would have come out. So he knew in private that he was covering that up. They knew that they were doing that. And so along with not just the media being completely sycophantic and constantly, giving I don't know how to describe it, a bad thing to Anthony Fauci every time he come on the radio, Anthony Fauci was really committing kind of, medical malpractice, but the media was committing media malpractice by not looking at anything, not reporting. I remember so clearly this one morning, I was going through all the COVID news for the day, and there was this report that came out that basically talked about the rate of death being very low. And, essentially it was like, hey, there's nothing to be afraid of. We can make it through COVID just fine. And I thought, oh, for sure, the fever's going to break. Everybody's going to realize this is all hype and we're afraid of nothing. It never broke, right? So the truth was known the whole time.
Media malpractice that told us all we had to trust the experts and that he was the expert that they elevated. And anybody who did not give complete blind faith to these expert opinions, which we now know were lies, was marginalized, vilified, demonized, censored,
canceled.
Yeah, I mean, I pointed out that this almost certainly came from the Wuhan lab, and I lost my Instagram was canceled with 1 million followers for misinformation. I never put any misinformation up. I put up all the things that we now know are true, and it was called misinformation, and the press was part of this collaboration. It was corrupt, and It did tremendous damage to the media in this country and to America's faith in that very important democratic institution. It also did incalculable damage to public health. My agency, when I walked into it, had a less than 30% trust from the American people, down from about 80% before the pandemic. Americans no longer trust public health.
That's terrible.
Because
Americans no longer trust the medical establishment. It seems obvious. It seems obvious to someone like me. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, look at what you lied to us. Everything from the food pyramid to COVID. Honestly, I could have let the food pyramid go. I'd made my peace with it, right? Most nutritious, consciously minded people had made their peace with the food pyramid. But the COVID thing got in our face, right? It wasn't just that they said, oh, hey, there's a pandemic. It was the lockdowns. It was the forced masks. It was the forced separations. It was keeping families away from each other when, elderly parents were in nursing homes. It was preventing people from gathering for funerals and weddings. It was so disruptive to civil society. The top-down approach, just telling you to stay home, flatten the curve, everything about it was a scam. How many people were hurt by Anthony Fauci and his lies and his what is appearing to be this maniacal effort to make sure his narrative, his preferred narrative, was the one that prevailed in the news? Here's Jesse Waters asking that same question. How many people were damaged by this?
And he's writing about the press like it's a woman that he's sleeping with. Here's some quotes.
Or dreamed of.
Right. The press is still hot and heavy about me. The situation with my national and international fame is explosive and really unimaginable. The press is going wild with me. But he also writes about himself, it's like self-pleasure. He writes, the donuts are being named after me. T-shirts have my picture on them. And San Francisco radio is dedicating a song to me. It goes on. And what this is really about is he's treating his guilty conscience because he knows he funded gain of function that slipped out of that Wuhan lab and infected millions of people. He writes in his diary the COVID fatality rate's like 0.2%. Goes on TV, he says it's like 3%. He's bragging in his little diary that he told de Blasio and Newsom to shut everything down, then goes on TV and says, I never told anybody to shut anything down. And then he tells everybody to go get vaxxed. You couldn't catch it. And then he writes in his diary, oh, yeah, people are catching it. And then he tells people don't have Thanksgiving dinner. Month before, he's having dinner with Jake Tapper.
Wow. Kennedy.
And isn't that classic? Isn't that exactly what we'd expect, right? Thundering Oak says, I didn't know public servants were paid so well. Yeah, not to be forgotten, Anthony Fauci was the #1 highest paid employee in all of federal government, including the president of the United States. He had a higher paycheck than the president of the United States. Tiff Time says, disgusting, dirty traitors, all of them. Yes, exactly. Ron says, it's just an accounting thing. Yeah, this Anthony Fauci situation, looking back. So in that, right, he's obsessed in his personal writings, his diary, as they're calling it. He's obsessed with his appearance in the media, that he's making it onto donuts. People are making T-shirts and writing songs about him, right? So that, we talk about the 7 deadly sins, right? Pride being one of those things, right? The pride is causing him to cause an immense amount of damage to the people of the United States and of the world at large. Right? America's doctor, the media is getting on board with this. They're using this COVID narrative to advance, on the bare minimum, their rating, because fear sells, and a more nefarious matter, they're in on some larger conspiracy against Donald Trump and conservatives and legacy Americans in what was going on with COVID, right? Because what do we know? Step out, look at it from 30,000 feet. We see COVID coming from China. China's an adversary. China's meddling in elections. We see states suspending their constitutions to modify election stuff. We see the American economy taking a huge hit. Like, everything that you can imagine is bad. Okay, everything you can imagine is bad. And not only that, it's bad just on a medical level. So Scott Gottlieb, who was the director at the FDA at the time that COVID was going down, was on the Squawk Box, CNBC. And he gets asked directly about Anthony Fauci, and he squirms.
How about your buddy, your buddy Fauci, that I've asked you about in the past? You've defended him quite a bit.
Look, I mean, I don't know what you're referring to in terms of.
I've asked about whether he orchestrated a cover-up of the lab origin because of his involvement in making gain-of-function research possible again in China, which he did. He knew that would come back to haunt him, and then basically told his colleagues, go with the natural origin. It was obvious 3 years ago, Scott, to me anyway, and everybody else, that he orchestrated that.
Yeah, look, we've talked about this on the show. I think the evidence in terms of whether this was human or naturally derived, I think the side of the ledger that speaks to this potentially coming out of a lab has grown over time. And we haven't had any new evidence suggesting that this came out of a natural origin or spillover.
The latest stuff that came out about him,
it was disappointing.
Didn't he know that it was likely it was from the lab and go to great lengths and tell people to destroy emails?
Well, look, I've looked through the emails, some of them that have been online. I think it's disappointing to see him trying to suppress alternative opinions, and that clearly was evidence from the emails.
I think it was disappointing that he was trying to suppress alternative opinions. See, Scott Gottlieb is as guilty as anybody else. He's guilty as anybody else. He's a smart man. He's in the medical industry. He should have been able to figure it out. If Peter McCullough could figure it out, heck, if Taylor John Atakis could figure it out, Scott Gottlieb could figure it out. So what was his motive, right? He was obviously trusting Dr. Fauci to one degree or another. Now, one of the other conspiracies that's out there is that the elites didn't take the shot. The elites didn't take the shot. They all took the saline, right? Oh, Donald Trump took the shot, but he took the saline. Okay, great. We absolutely know for a fact, because of the way they rolled out the vaccine with Operation Warp Speed, there were a lot of batches of saline that made it out into the population because we were the experiment. So they had to have a control group, and the control group came from people who thought they got the shot but got saline. So some people could have potentially got a saline shot, believe they have the COVID shot, actually have a COVID vaccination card, and never got the vaccination. Okay, that is a confirmed fact. But we also have confirmation that certain batches were worse than others. So if you got a bad batch, your likelihood of just adverse reactions went up, and certain batches you had death as one of the common denominators. Like, a batch of a lot of 100 vaccines resulted in 7 or 8 or 9 deaths, whereas another batch and 30 or 40 side effects, another batch of 100 resulted in 30 or 40 side effects, no deaths though, and then another batch, 0 side effects, 0 anything. That's the saline, okay? So we see that. We a couple of weeks ago, a month and a half, 2 months ago, we played a clip with Peter McCullough going over those recent studies showing, hey, this explains how, certain communities, certain neighborhoods centered around certain vaccination sites saw more issues than other sites. But this idea that the elites were going and getting a vaccine for show, but it wasn't the real vaccine, I think that the following clip kind of debunks that. I think a lot of these guys, including Anthony Fauci, they actually drank their Kool-Aid. They really did. They actually really thought that this was a vaccine developed under the proper science. Like, this is very common for communists, Soviets, Chinese communists. They trust the system. That's the Kool-Aid they're drinking. Trust the system, trust the government. And so, not knowing that Anthony Fauci is a fraud, it's easy to see how people who have that mentality, my rights come from government, not from God, that kind of a mentality, that the government's lying to, and they would go take the shot. Even someone like Anthony Fauci, who knows the truth, might still think that these shots are a good thing, right? He's drank the Kool-Aid. He took the shot, and it turns out he actually had a vaccine side effect.
He was given a pardon prospectively from the last administration. We don't know if it was an auto pen pardon. It doesn't really matter for legality purposes. But Americans want to know, a lot of them, is there going to be any accountability for trillions of dollars lost, children's education destroyed, and public health industry reputation shattered?
Yeah, and millions of people injured. He lied about masks. He lied about social distancing. He lied about the transmission. He lied about natural immunity. He lied about the capacity, as you just said, of the vaccine to prevent infection, to prevent it. He got vaccinated, a very, very public press conference in January of 2020. And then 5 months later, he had, and this is the first time that we knew this from the diary, he had a pulmonary infarction, which is one of the adverse events that NIH, CDC, and FDA said are expected from the vaccine. He never told anybody. He got treated for it privately by the best doctors in America. At the same time, he was telling everybody that that was not an adverse event.
So he literally got treated for an adverse event, didn't disclose it to anybody anywhere, right? And it was one of the listed side effects, pulmonary infraction. He got it 5 months after the vaccine. He got the side effect. So the idea that they all took saline, Anthony Fauci himself took a bad batch. Anthony Fauci himself had a vaccine side effect. How common is that? How many people out there wearing masks in their car today are wearing it because the cognitive dissonance just will not allow them. It just will not allow them to see that they've been fooled. It's easier to fool a man than to convince him he has been fooled, right? I think Anthony Fauci drank the Kool-Aid. Anthony Fauci was high on all the media attention that he got. He'd never experienced that before. In all the press that he'd gotten before, it was the story came, the story went. He was the hot thing for a Thursday afternoon, and away the story went. Some HIV breakthrough or some funding, announcement. Story in, story out. COVID was different. COVID was different. With COVID, he was talked about on the news 1,000 times a day. Like you said, the fame has grown to such a degree, it's overwhelming. Donuts in San Francisco and songs being written about me. That was a level of ego inflation that very few people can really survive, especially if you're not tethered to the truth, your Hippocratic oath and all that kind of stuff, which clearly Anthony Fauci wasn't. He was comfortable knowing that the death count was low, the death percentage was low, but telling Americans it was a high amount. He knew that masks weren't going to do anything. He knew that social distancing was made up. But oh, how the tyrant just loves to see you dance. When they say jump, they just so badly want you to respond how high. That's all they really want. They just want control. They just want to be bullies, right? So that is how someone like Anthony Fauci could essentially have his virtue or his vices, better put this in this particular example, his vice weaponized against him, right? Who benefited from COVID? Was it just that Anthony Fauci got a big payday? No. Is it just the Pfizer stock options went up? No, it's not just that. It was literally a play for control over the planet. I mean, that's really what you got to look at. Tim Burkhart, who is becoming one of my favorite congressmen. Tim Burkhart was on with the Benny Johnson show, and he shares an anecdote. He says, I'm up here on Capitol Hill, sleep in my office, but you go to the gym, you take a shower, you brush your teeth. It's the same routine every day. And so you start to see all the other people that are using the gym and using the locker room and stuff like that. And so you meet all kinds of interesting cats, as he calls them, right? Cool cats. And so he's sharing a story during COVID one morning, when he goes to the locker room and he does his workout and he's getting there brushing his teeth, and he's standing next to a high-level senior intelligence official, okay? Doesn't disclose who it is. He's standing next to a high-level senior intelligence official, and this is the short story he shares. They understood this then. The intelligence community understood this then, but they allowed, at a minimum, right, casting a cloak of charity, they at a minimum allowed Anthony Fauci to deceive the American people, to allow the news media to run with the narrative. And we're going to ask ourselves why here in just a second.
Time in the gym, the same guys that are working at the same time, and you kind of develop this sort of thing. And so I was standing next to this ranking member on intelligence, and he said, "Tim," I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Have you been following this COVID thing?" And I said, "Just a little." I said, "Something out of China, some place called Wuhan or something." He goes, "Yeah." He goes, and he just keeps looking ahead, Ben. This is like something out of a movie, and I'll never forget this. And he said, "You know what else is in Wuhan?" I said, "No, what's that?" And he said, "It's their biological weapons facilities there." And I go, "Really?" And he says, "You know what else China has a problem with?" He's still just combing his hair, brushing his teeth. And I said, "No, sir. What is?" And he goes, "The other problem China has is people are living too long." And I'll never forget that conversation. And I remembered thinking how the Chinese, up until the 70s, they had a plan that they were going to drop nuclear bombs on their own people just to see what the what the outcome would be. They're ruthless. They get it as far as that goes. I mean, not like we think. My dad fought after the Pacific. He was like James Wood. My dad fought in the Pacific, in the Marine Corps, and fought the Japanese all the way across the Pacific. And then went to China. And he would talk to me how the Chinese, just their mentality, how they would just sacrifice people. You know, they'd literally move mountains. There's cases where there was a factory and they just picked up the pieces and got all the peasants just carry this over the mountain. And, and they just did. And if they died, they died. And
so they dropped a nuke. They dropped a nuke on our country. And it's COVID. They dropped a nuke on the entire world. And they did it with Dr. Fauci. And I know that Rand Paul. I know that you're no fan of Dr. Fauci. What do you think is going to happen in the next couple? What should happen? How about this? What should happen?
I think he should be brought up on charges. I think our Justice Department ought to take the information that's coming out of Jim Jordan's committee and that Rand Paul, his committee, obviously will be. Rand has been on this thing like a dog on a bone, man. He ain't going to turn it loose. And I love him for that. He's been right on this issue all along. He's never given up, kind of like Mike Lee and some of the others on the Save America Act. But the reality is that will we do anything? Probably not. You and I have talked about compromise, and ultimately this town is compromised. And Trump's running into that time and time again. He fires the top 2 or 3 people, but it's that layers the onion, that deep state, we call it, that sewer that is Washington, D.C. And both parties are in on it because both parties have members that have profited from it, I think, ultimately. And that's what'll stop it. They'll delay. And they know if they get to a next administration that it loses some of its luster. Nobody talks much about the poor people that were, in my opinion, were wrongly imprisoned during January 6th, but they should. Yeah. But it just, again, we want our pizzas in 30 minutes or less, and that's about our attention span.
And that's the challenge, right? We want our pizzas in 30 minutes or less, and we're not willing to stick around 5 years to see what happens to Dr. Fauci. If we don't get our answer right now today, then we seem to forget about it and we just move on. And it's a huge problem. And he talks about the deep state, right? The deep state, both parties, there's thousands of them. They're buried in deep. They want to resist. We see this. We know this. You guys are peasants. Every day we get on, we watch these little developing clips and it stacks on top of each other. This information starts to compound and you start to go, oh, this is a small group of people trying to create a narrative, to try to create a zeitgeist and a plausible believability that whatever direction they're leading us down the garden path, that it's the truth or that it's the right thing or that we, the people, are doing this together and we've decided. And it's just not the truth, right? Madam Mim says, it makes you wonder if the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. Yes, I do not think, this is my opinion, I do not think anybody sat down with Anthony Fauci and said, hey, listen, we need you to ignore this Wuhan virus lab and do a wet market narrative. Why? Oh, because we want to steal the election. Well, what's the connection between the two? Nobody ever sat down and explained to Anthony Fauci, oh, by the way, you're going to get super famous, but you're going to become the face of COVID, which is how we're going to steal the election and perform a coup. Oh, and by the way, you're working with Iran, Venezuela, and China in doing that. Oh, and by the way, you're a traitor. No, I don't think they ever got the briefing, right? I don't think they ever got the briefing that the vaccine was a bioweapon or that COVID was a bioweapon. I think that they were in CYA mode. I think that Anthony Fauci was more interested in covering up, his grants and his buddy over at EcoHealth Alliance, that the cover-up just became like a gift to China. China was probably like, well, shoot, if you guys would have run with lockdowns, we would have gotten mass death and lockdowns and totalitarian control. But instead, you guys ran with, lies and didn't pull it off very well. And Trump wasn't 100% behind you. And so it kind of fell apart midsummer. And, but that's okay. We love it when Americans don't trust their government. We love it when the government gets caught lying. We love that, right? It was like they couldn't lose in dropping a biological nuke on top of us. And again, what RFK explains is this really was, in my opinion, one of those instances where someone's personal ego got out ahead of them and they became a useless idiot or, an apparatchik in a coup against we the people.
The worst part is that giddy narcissism that you see throughout the diary is juxtaposed against really bad public health decisions. So his focus was on self-promotion, clearly, and nobody can read these diaries and say this is a political response. His focus was on promoting himself, on getting on TV, and not doing public health. The worst part is that giddy narcissism that you see throughout the
Giddy narcissism. The worst part was the giddy narcissism. His focus was on getting on TV, not on public health. I think that is the real tragedy in all of this. It would be so much easier to wrap this up in a bow and say they were all in on it. They tried to overthrow Donald Trump. They all have nefarious behavior. And there are some characters in the story like Robert Redband, or what was it, Redband? No, whatever it is. Redfield, coming out of the CDC, is apparently a really good guy. And now he's kind of like, yeah, we tried to debate this, but Anthony Fauci kept shutting it down. So good guys like that kind of got caught in the crosshairs. And it's like, is he bad? Is he in on it? Or is he just kind of a guy who picked a really poor career that led him down the, path where he was a cog in the population control ideologically captured people? Who knows, right? A lot of these people in their hearts, there's a phrase I always try to remember when I'm looking at people. Everybody's rational in their own minds. Even people who take the dark side, the dark path. In their mind, it's rational, right? In their mind, it's justification, it's vindication, it's retribution, it's revenge, it's you did this, so I deserve to do this, right? There's always a rationalization. Everybody in their own mind is rational, even though sometimes we look at it, we think that is the most irrational thing you could do. Anthony Fauci gets praised for being a hero, for saying what we all wanted to hear in the moment. And when I say what we all wanted to hear, it's not really what we all wanted to hear. It's what the people on the left wanted to hear on CNN and MSNBC. Trump's bad and he's ruining the country and go on lockdown and there's a virus and he's incompetent and can't handle it. That's what they wanted to hear. That's what he was willing to say, or at least promote. And in the end, instead of being a hero, he ends up being a villain. If he had told the truth, like all prophets, we would have stoned him, but then we would vindicate them later. Today, to be a prophet, you don't have to die. You just have to speak the truth and live long enough to see the truth be its own defense, right? To see the truth vindicate you. Then he could have been a national hero. He could have been someone that they wrote books about, right? How Fauci saved America. But instead, he went along with it. And instead, it's Fauci nearly destroyed America, right? Fauci nearly destroyed America. That's really what's going to be told. Now, the other thing Burkouch says is he talks about the deep state, the people that are planted in intelligence, just all through the bureaucracy. The major problem is in the intelligence community itself, because they operate behind this cloak of obscurity where they only talk to 8 members of Congress, the 8. And everyone else is kind of in the dark, just getting FOIAs here and there. Well, Polte, who's the director of housing, has been over at DNI. Jay Clayton's advancing in the Senate. He's going for the floor float, so he's got not very much time left, but he's been doing release after release. He's been posting a lot of the stuff that they released last week, page by page on his account, but he's also been doing some firings. And the news is upset, including Keep Deep State Ken Delanian.
ODNI's acting director, Bill Pulte, has announced yet another round of layoffs. It's the 4th time that he has cut the U.S. intelligence workforce since he replaced Tulsi Gabbard back on June 19th. While not offering a specific number of these layoffs, Pulte posted on Sunday that the latest wave was, quote, thoughtful and measured. Sure. Joining us now, MS Now Justice and Intelligence reporter Ken Delanian. Ken, always great to see you. What's the latest we know about this latest round of cuts?
Jonathan, we know very little. I checked in with sources in one of the oversight committees that should, in theory, be briefed on these kinds of things, and they know nothing about who actually has been laid off. And look, there's been, concerns for years that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, created after 9/11 to synthesize intelligence across the agencies, that it had grown bloated, that it was essentially a bureaucracy where people went to sort of serve their time. There certainly was some of that, and some pairing of jobs would not be greeted with opposition in all quarters of intelligence officials that I talk to. But this seems like carnage. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been laid off. This is the 4th round, as you mentioned, Pulte is telling us. And we have no idea on what basis this is being conducted, but every reason to suspect, based on Pulte's track record, that there are political considerations in mind here as people are losing their jobs, Jonathan.
Yeah, because Pulte's doing this, of course, while he's also working on dubious intel about election interference, and many people thinking he's laying some sort of groundwork for the Trump White House to meddle with, or at least contest, what happens this November. So, Ken, what's the latest on Pulte? How much longer is he going to have this job? Do we have any sense?
Well, it all depends on the fate of Jay Clayton and how fast they can get him confirmed. And, you know, Pulte declassified some documents over the weekend related to that disclosure that President Trump made the other night. You know, raw intelligence, mostly redacted, telling us things we already knew about China's effort to interfere in American politics. But
I have to say, when he says telling us things we already knew about China's effort to interfere, no duh. We've known China was behind this for a long time. You're the ones who now suddenly are acting like you've known it all along. Then where was the reporting?
Painting this sort of false picture that there are revelations buried in the intelligence that suggest that American voting machines are open to manipulation and hacking, which just isn't the case, according to the conclusions of these very intelligence agencies and others. But that's the kind of thing that Pulte was brought in to do, and he looks like he's getting all the mileage he can out of his job before he heads for the doorways, Jonathan.
Yeah, dubious intelligence elevated in a primetime White House address by the President of the United States.
Dubious intelligence.
ODNI's
It's the opposite, right? The dubious intelligence was what came out 4 years ago, and that was the whole point of the Ratcliffe objecting. He's like, "This is dubious. I'm throwing down." He actually uses an example from the Cuba Missile Crisis, where he goes, one official objected to the consensus, and he ended up being right. Okay, he used that as an example in his letter, saying, "I am citing against the consensus view of the intelligence agency." Who's this consensus view? The same people that Anthony Fauci was either able to manipulate or played along with, or directed Anthony Fauci, who knows at this point, to cover up the lab leak and to, you know, basically keep COVID the way it played out so that it would result in a stolen election. Same people. So the Slaughter case, Trump can fire people inside the federal government, anybody he wants. They don't have any kind of real protection against him. And Pulte's doing it. And allegedly, this is his fourth round of firings. We don't know who, but hundreds of people. Thank goodness. Thank goodness that's happening. Now, we are always concerned about centralization of power. Right now, intelligence is being decentralized, right? It had been centralized after 9/11. It's being decentralized. Decentralization is the solution to almost everything, right? Guns, huge problem in the hands of a tyrant. Guns in the hands of a peasant, now you're equal to the tyrant, right? What is the phrase? God made men equal, but Henry Colt made them. There's a God created men equally, but Henry Colt kept them equal, or something to that effect, right? It's this idea that when we all have the same technology, we all have the same tools, then some will choose to use them for bad, sure, but many will choose to use them for good. And society on the whole, I believe, is good. So any tool put in the hands of the many are going to create a better result. Anytime someone wants to say, I know the truth, or I have something better than others, and they want to centralize that and they want to project that out, it's 100,000% of the time a problem. The printing press in the hands of just a church can create a cult. The printing press in the hands of everyone will unlock the mysteries of the universe and physics, right? The tools are just that. One of the tools that's coming around right now is AI. I want to show you something that is very, very cool. And I've started to have an immense amount of respect for people who play around with technology. So I'm one of those kids that grew up with computers in the home. I had a Commodore 64 at the house. My dad always had computers. I used to use DOS prompts when I was like 10 years old to get into my Duke Nukem games and stuff like that. My Prince of Persia games on the Intel 365s and 465 machines. I think we even had a 265 at one point. I remember one time I had what I thought was a 565, 585, whatever number, but I think that's when they went to Pentium, Pentium 1 chips. Anyways, bottom line, I grew up around computers and stuff like that, and I wasn't really I didn't gravitate to them. But as I'm older, I'm recognizing that it's an incredible tool that all of us can use, and AI is emerging. Now, previous to now, the internet and technical tools have been for the most part, available in open source. People could gather things and build, but it's not huge. Not tons of people do it, but more and more people are becoming more and more comfortable with technology, and they're starting to use it. And there's a product called a Raspberry Pi, and this is like a small motherboard that could assist in certain types of computing, and they would use it for essentially facial recognition type AI computing. Well, this company, Raspberry Pi, just upgraded their little program. So now you can have LLM models. You can have your own AI that is captured on this little device that doesn't talk to the rest of the internet. This is called open source tools, right? This is an open source tool, and I think that this is super cool. So we're going to watch this little clip about the Raspberry Pi and its new little product, because I just think it's the coolest thing, and I think that we should all be trying to decentralize tech, right? We're trying to decentralize money with Bitcoin. We need to decentralize tech along with it. So here's the new Raspberry Pi, and I'll share with you why this is so incredibly important.
Raspberry Pi released this today. The Raspberry Pi AI Hat Plus 2. Bit of a mouthful, but let me show you why this thing is awesome. Because this is the original Raspberry Pi AI Hat Plus. And if you didn't know, this thing kind of sucks. Sorry, Raspberry Pi. First, it has 0 RAM, which means it literally has to steal RAM from the Raspberry Pi to even work. And you can really only use this with camera-based AI, like object detection or image recognition. That's so 2024. So, out with the old, in with the new, the Raspberry Pi AI Hat Plus 2. Let's open it. Here it is. It's more substantial, not as shiny, but they look pretty similar. But check this out. This one's so powerful, the new one comes with a heatsink. This is required because this new AI hat has 8 gigs of onboard RAM, which means for us, we can run larger AI models, but it's going to draw more power, which means more heat. But who cares? 100% local AI on this little device. I'll show you that in a second, but first, let's put this sucker on a Raspberry Pi. I have no idea how to do this. I'm going to put the heatsink on first, I think. All right, it's installed, and I think you just have to push this through those spring screws. I do enjoy those. It's installed. Here I have a Raspberry Pi 5, 16 gigs. I'll need to install the standoffs first, and then this little spiky riser for all the GPIO pins. Ow, it's like Hellraiser. That's not a pleasant experience. And then finally, the hat itself. Trying to line up these pins. Oh, actually, that was nice. I like that. Now let's install the screws. All right, he has his hat on, and from here, the setup is pretty straightforward. We'll flash a fresh Raspberry Pi OS image and install Halo software for the AI Hat Plus 2. We'll then install Docker, start the Halo AI service, and now the Pi sees this as a local AI accelerator. What a cool sentence. From there, we'll pull down our large language model directly onto the hat. No cloud, no API keys, it's all local. Check this out, I can send a prompt to it straight from the terminal. Now I get it, terminal's not for everyone, it should be, but you can run OpenWebUI in another container, connect to it from your web browser, and have a nice ChatGPT style interface. Look at that, it works perfectly. And this is coming directly from this Raspberry Pi, running entirely on the board.
Isn't that great? Isn't that great? You can have your own local AI. Now that Raspberry Pi, it's like $250, and you can have your own small LLM model answering your own personal questions. So this idea of decentralization, it's incredibly important for the survival of humanity, right? Technology, especially technology as powerful as AI and, large language model computing and just, computing in general, when left in the hands of only the elite, it's inevitable it'll be abused. So there has to be an ability for we, the people, to have access to that tech, just like we had to have access to gunpowder and guns, right? But once you let the genie out of the bottle, you can't really get it back in. So this idea of open source versus closed source. So Apple is closed source economy, right? Apple products only really work with Apple products. Nothing really plugs in. They all have to use their proprietary closed door stuff. Open source, other developers can plug in. So, Microsoft makes a computer and they're like, okay, but here's the open source plugin so other developers can create programs that run almost like they're native to a Microsoft product. Whereas Apple products, it's always a plugin or something like that. So a widget kind of thing. So Jason Huang, the president CEO of NVIDIA, who makes chips that go into the AI stuff, he got a X account the other day. Apparently he hasn't had an X account. And he posted an article, and I should go grab it, but I didn't grab it in my show prep. But he posted an article that he released, an open letter, where he supports open source. So what he's saying is that all of NVIDIA's technology and how to use their chips and everything is going to be made open source. So they're going to support open source development. That is a really big deal, right? You see that little Raspberry Pi? You can have your own little AI. If you want to have a powerful AI, you can create your own servers. You can buy NVIDIA chips. You can create your own programs. You can do whatever you want. He views it as a tool, and he views open source as critical for humanity, for freedom, for humanity's freedom. He was doing an interview with see, who was this? I don't remember who the interview is. Behind the Curtain is where he did an interview. He was doing an interview on Behind the Curtain, and there's this kind of discussion over is AI so powerful that it should be kept in the hands of the regulated few, or should it be open to anybody, even if there is potential harm? He gives a great answer. Let's take a listen.
Do you think we're ready for Anthropic's powerful Claude Mythos to be available to everyone? Are our systems sufficiently hardened?
It should absolutely be available to everyone. It's their responsibility to make sure that it's hardened. No software.
So you're saying all users, not just selected institutions as it is now?
That's correct. Yeah, they had to make it available for people, and it's their job to make the technology hardened and safe and secure. And whatever jailbreaks or whatever vulnerabilities there are in the software, as soon as they find it, they ought to fix it. That's the nature of software. And look what happened. It was released. Somehow it was jailbreaked, and it was able to do things that maybe they were trying to guardrail it for not to do. But everything was fine. You and I are still here having a conversation, and not that I'm encouraging it, but that's the job of companies. They're supposed to identify vulnerabilities and patch it up as quickly as possible.
So this is a message to both the White House and to Anthropic that you think that Mythos should be available to all.
Mythos should be available as a service. Yeah, and remember, just because Mythos is not available, open models are available anyhow. And so I think that let Anthropic run. Let them continue to advance the technology that they created. Let it be put in the hands of as many companies as possible so we can all use it and benefit from it. And holding Anthropic back is not in the benefit of the United States. And let them run.
Do you think
so? These AI companies, you should let them run, but you should also let the free market. So these AI companies, yeah, you should let them run, but you should also let the free market have access to that tech to be able to build and create if Anthropic is jailbreaking and breaking every bank account, then every bank should have an AI to fight it, right? It's like obvious. When we talk about projection of power, we the people should be able to project that same power back. Ron Cleaver says, Ken Delanian also says about the firing several reasons why they're justified layoffs. Then why are they there to begin with if it's so obvious? Good question. Tomaste says, wow, pretty sure you can do that local AI on a Start 9. Yeah, you probably can. It doesn't take that much. That's what I'm learning. It doesn't take that much. You can upload a ton of information and you need a lot of storage, but the actual LLM model, it takes computing power, but it's not, just to run a simple, local LLM. You don't need a server the size of your garage. You need a Raspberry Pi or a Start 9 server, or there's a series of other servers that can run localized AI, and you can put it in a box so it doesn't access the internet. Only knows what you train it. It's pretty powerful. Yeah, very, very powerful. And I think it's great that Jason Wong is supporting this, open development, that everybody should have access to the technology. Anthropic should continue. Their products that are open source should be open source, and there are other open source products, he says, right? They should be used. I think that this last week, Elon Musk, Jason Wong, and a handful of others all came out and said they support open source, that they want that is the check and balance to the dangers of AI, is putting AI in the hands of the people so it can be a tool. If the wise counsel of many, as Lisa at 1776 Live says all the time. Okay, so Scott Bessent was also on with Hannity, and he had this to say about the economy, and I think this is an interesting factoid.
I've seen Elon speak for a long time, and he is, look, his record speaks for itself, both in terms as an inventor, as a venture capitalist, as a great American. But he's normally early. he's just so far ahead of the curve. He sees things that no one else sees.
Right.
But I do think we are building this incredible economy that we can't even imagine. Sean, 25% of the jobs that exist today did not exist in 2000.
When I graduated high school, 25% of the jobs that exist today didn't exist then. They weren't even in the catalog for career options when I was meeting with my college guidance counselor, right? 25% of jobs since 2020. I imagine in 20 years from now, it'll be another 25 or another 50% of jobs didn't exist today, right? Things like AI onboarder and AI maintenance tech and AI prompt. There's probably a million AI titled jobs that are going to exist that will replace old jobs. But there's always need for people, right? Especially if we have the tech, because you can always go build, unleash that entrepreneurial spirit. So, the possibility of a huge productivity boom, these are things that are there. It's if we have enough productivity and they don't print money, we might save our economy and kick the can down the road another generation. Or the economy might grow and they decide, hey, look, we can spend more money, and they'll spend more money and they'll just accelerate the downfall of the fiat system. Either way, it doesn't matter, right? Part of the challenge that we have as a country is everything is finance centric. That's one of the challenges we have, right? Everything is finance centric. Here's Donald Trump. This is audio only. This is off of Air Force One. He's being asked about Venezuela and what's going on down there and all the money that we've pulled out of Venezuela. Now, for me, Venezuela is justified because Nicolas Maduro, A, was a narco-terrorist and was deeply involved in the infiltration and invasion of our country, as well as the fact that he took proactive measures to engage with election systems that I believe tampered with the United States election, if not rigged it or stole it outright. That right there is justification to take out Nicolas Maduro. And one of the things Patrick Burns said, kind of in passing on an interview with Emerald Robinson, was that he was not happy with Donald Trump sending all these businessmen down to carve up Venezuela. He didn't like that, right? Yes, you freed Venezuela from a horrible dictator, but now you've got your business people in working with the number 2 horrible dictator, Delcy Rodriguez, and because she's playing ball and you're making money, you're kind of letting it fly. I think the story's unwritten. I think Venezuela has a lot of future. I think they're going to have a huge say. But yeah, right now it does sound like the United States has kind of come in like vultures to take over Venezuela, which is why this question makes sense. They're asking, where's the money going? And Donald Trump's answer is, it just goes to the country. We're spending it.
There's been reports that the United States has taken in $13 billion from Venezuela. Where is that money going?
$13 billion from Venezuela? I think even more than that. No, Venezuela, we paid for that war many times over. And that'll happen with Iran also. We paid for the war many times over.
But where is that money going?
Which, by the way, no other president can say that for a long time. Okay? When was the last president that could say that? So we had a cost of Venezuela. We paid for it many, many times over. And now, as you know, we have a very good relationship with Venezuela.
Where is that money going?
Who's toward running the country?
No, it's the U.S. The money that the U.S. is taking in. Where is that money going? Yes.
Toward running the country. It can go to the military. Congress has to approve it. Congress doesn't like approving money for the military. They like giving it to things that shouldn't be done. But we're taking in a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars from Venezuela.
So this Venezuela thing is now being justified after the fact, right? As we're taking in money from Venezuela and it's going to run the country. It's just going into the general fund. This is how last month in June, the United States had a budget surplus, right? We spent less money than we took in revenue, and it's because of these new sources of revenue. So on one hand, it's like, yes, that's great, wonderful. On the other hand, it's like, well, hold on though, is this the best metric, right? Now, money is money. The ledger's got to balance. You're not going to run away from that debt, so that's got to be dealt with. So on one hand, great news. On another hand, look at the incentive. Because we have debt, right, and we can successfully go and take over another nation and make money, right? Now war isn't just profitable because we get to build guns and, make our home factories profitable. Now it's actually profitable for the nation state. Up until now, war for the nation state prior to World War II was not a profitable venture. The winner didn't really win, right? Like in old times, the winner usually got paid back, but the skirmishes were smaller. When you're talking total devastation, nobody really gets paid back, okay? You make your profit while you fight. Afterwards, you make your profit rebuilding, but nobody really gets paid back a war debt. The the families of soldiers who died don't ever get compensated, right? It's not really fair. So what we've got going on over in Iran, we've hoped that it would be a very short engagement. We hoped that Donald Trump was right. It would be a 6-week event, and that has not been the case, right? We've had back and forth, peace, no peace, we're going to blow you up, we're not going to blow you up. I was a little disturbed yesterday to hear Lindsey Graham when he was watching Donald Trump saying Donald Trump loves bombing and he's good at bombing. And I was like, is this a childhood game? So who knows? Meanwhile, the back and forth with Iran has continued. Trey Yanks gave us an update this morning.
Nights, the United States has halted strikes against Iran, but the White House is making clear the military option remains on the table as the administration is exploring a variety of options moving forward with both diplomacy and intense economic pressure. The U.S. naval blockade does remain in effect, costing the regime hundreds of millions of dollars per day.
The Iranian regime is isolated, economically devastated, militarily devastated. Inflation is spiking. The currency is tanking. Foreign currency reserves are gone. And we're starting to see the Iranian government even not be able to pay its own workers and even its own military.
Axios reports that the top U.S. military commander in the Middle East, Admiral Brad Cooper, recommended stopping the bombing campaign around the Strait of Hormuz because it has reached the limit of its effectiveness, according to two sources with knowledge of his position. Now, despite the pause in military action, countries across the region remain on high alert. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke with Fox News over the weekend ahead of his trip to the United States, where he described what will happen if Iran attacks first.
If Iran attacks Israel, either directly or through proxies, either with ballistic missiles or UAVs or killer drones, it will make a terrible mistake because our response, Israel's response, will be very, very forceful.
We're also tracking another interesting development in this conflict involving Ukraine. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, this weekend, Ukrainian forces struck Iranian vessels that were carrying military cargo between Russia and Iran in the Caspian Sea. The Iranians responded by saying the strikes cannot go unanswered. There are a lot of moving parts right now in the region, but there's also an ongoing U.S. military buildup to give President Trump a variety of options moving forward. For the past three...
So this is getting pretty hairy, right? You've got Russia supplying Iran. Ukrainians are now fighting the Iranians on behalf of America for Iran because they're now interjecting themselves into that conflict. Obviously, China is involved with Iran. You've got the Strait of Hormuz. 20-30% of the world's GDP flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So all of that is on the table, and our president is sitting here asking, why don't these guys want to capitulate? It's bad business for them not to capitulate. We're going to make our money back on Iran. There's a conversation now about America charging tolls. So what was previously international waterway, free for anybody to travel, now somebody is going to be charging tolls, whether it's the Americans or whether it's the Iranians. That concept is a new concept, and it could be very bad for the United States. So this is a longer video, and I've been building up to this today. I want to take a fresh look at the situation with America and the Strait of Hormuz and the bombing of Iran. This is a long analysis, and I think it's worth listening to. It's not a critique necessarily. It's someone who has spent most of his adult life planning the bombing around the Strait of Hormuz and the bombing of Iran and why it was never done. And a lot of the stuff he's talking about hasn't really been addressed. So let's take a listen. This is informative, and it will help us see better the conflict in the Middle East.
I've been modeling the bombing of Iran for 20 years. The fact is the modeling has held up, and literally month by month by month, when we were first here, the big surprise for most people was that we bombed the regime in Iran and it still stood. It survived, even though we killed the supreme leader and something like 137 of their top leaders. Think about that. So that would be like if somebody killed our president, his wife, the first lady, members of the first family, half of the cabinet, all of the leaders in the Pentagon, all of the leaders in the CIA, and about a third of the Congress. That is what we did to Iran in those opening weeks in March. And nonetheless, that regime survived. And that was something that modeling showed for that 20 years. That was based on substantial patterns in history where air power alone had never toppled a regime, going all the way back to World War I. Most people had not really heard that before. Many people, even in the military, did not fully know how much President Trump went up against the weight of history. Then we shifted. We shifted to 6 weeks of a bombing campaign. And then what did we do? We shifted over to a 2-month blockade. Well, that was another version of punishment. So
the US said that they were going to block the Strait of Hormuz, basically trying to take control of it themselves.
That's right.
And therefore kind of punishing the rest of the world.
Well, they didn't want to punish the world. That did happen, but what they wanted to do was punish Iran. So they were trying to coerce Iran to get the government to surrender control of Hormuz. So keep in mind, what happened is on February 28th, that regime change bombing happened, and it went on for a few days. But by March 2nd, March 3rd, Iran controlled Hormuz, literally within a few days. The ships stopped cold. And they basically have not reopened except for teeny tiny periods of time in a modest way. And then you're stuck. How do you get Iran to give up control of Hormuz, or do you let Iran continue to control Hormuz for as far as the eye can see? That's been the dilemma we've been in, Stephen, since really the first week in March, and now it's become clearer to the world. That is the core dilemma. We're at a fork in the road. Either we physically take Hormuz back, all those other tactics, even the MOU didn't work, didn't get.
The MOU.
The Memorandum of Understanding.
Which was I sat here with JD Vance, and he told me that they were about to sign an agreement with Iran to ultimately end the war. And they had that agreement.
Yeah.
JD told me that it was about to be signed. A couple of weeks later, here we are. They're back to bombing each other.
Yeah, there's really two big issues with this, Stephen, with the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding. I do believe that Vice President Vance sincerely thought it was going to, had a good chance of ending the war. But there's a big problem here, Stephen, which is when you listen to Vice President Vance, he approached this as a business deal. So he kept talking about all the benefits that were going to come to Iran if they performed. Fee for service. We want the strait open, and we're going to offer you money in different ways if you will open the strait. Well, this is just a fundamental misunderstanding of international politics. This may work great in real estate. I'm not saying it doesn't. But in a major war like this, what's at stake is the balance of power. The balance of power. Now, I want to explain that before the war started, there was a balance of power where America was ascendant, Israel was the rising power, and Iran was actually the declining power in the region. What happened almost within, again, 2 weeks of the war starting is the balance of power was shifting dramatically. When Iran became in control of Hormuz, this represents tremendous power in the future. That wealth, all of the potential, that even though it hadn't been realized yet, equates to not just money to put in coffers, but it equates to military power. It equates to the ability to influence other states in the region, to build a sphere of influence. This is power in terms of major power politics that was shifting here. And so with the MOU, as you look at the MOU, JD Vance appears, we could just look at it, he appears to have thought this was a business deal. So he appears to have thought, we're going to hold up the promise of, say, $300 billion. It will eventually fall on you if you will just agree to do what we want and behave. Those aren't the clauses that matter to Iran. The clauses that mattered to Iran were the clauses which directly relate to the balance of power in solidifying Iran, its control of Hormuz. And essentially, this MOU is fundamentally a roadmap to Iran becoming the regional hegemon.
Hegemon? What does that mean?
The most dominant state in the Persian Gulf in the Middle East.
Wait, so you're saying that this agreement would make them the most dominant state in the Middle East?
Absolutely.
So why wouldn't they sign it within a heartbeat?
They did. They did. Iran, in fact, most of these points were exactly the points that President Trump said he would never sign in April when Iran presented the initial 14-point plan in April.
So
and
why,
the key
why are we
point,
back at war then?
Well, let me just explain. The key things that happened here is that, number one, notice in Article 5, it says that Iran will make the arrangements with Hormuz, that is the ships with Hormuz, and it will not charge for 60 days. It doesn't say it will never charge. It says only 60 days. So think about that this is already written into the agreement that President Trump is signing. And then if you say, well, what's going to happen down the road? It's going to be Iran and Oman who are going to determine the future fees. There's no mention here of the United States. There's no clause to even let the United States wiggle itself in. This is a perfectly clearly written clause, and this basically gives Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz and also of the discretion to set the fees for as far as the eye can see with no constraint whatsoever.
How do we know that this is the actual document?
Because both the Iranian government and the White House put out exactly the same document, word for word, so that we can actually compare them literally word for word. So this is exactly the document that President Trump signed. There's no question that we have like an earlier draft. Now, there were some earlier drafts leaked by Bloomberg. That's not what this is. This is the final one. But let me go a little bit further here, Steve. So here we're talking about the strategic base of Iran. And keep in mind, controlling Hormuz means controlling 20% of the world's oil. That's a fantastic amount of wealth and strategic power to build on in the future. No limit says nothing about you can't spend it on missiles, anything else. But up here with Lebanon, the first article. So here.
So when you say article, this document contains 14 different points. And when you
14
say articles,
different points. And there are 3
points.
points that are really the critical action points that matter here. This promise of $300 billion down the road, this is so far, this is like holding out funny money to the Iranians. These are the things that are actually short term because this is happening now.
That's happening now. Wow. So I think that is a great assessment of what's going on with Iran, is inadvertently by destroying, Iran's defenses, taking out the Ayatollah, something that they couldn't have wished for. They have de facto control of the Strait of Hormuz. Despite all of our efforts, they can disrupt shipping and transit through the Strait of Hormuz because of their geography to such a degree that no matter how many Tomahawk missiles we use, they still have that control. And knowing they have that control and they can flex that muscle at any point into the future shifts the balance of power instantaneously. Because up until now, in theory, they could shut it down, but they'd never done it. Now they've done it. That could be majorly consequential. This is another one of those issues we call blowback. In 50 years, when our grandkids are like, Mom and Dad, why is it so expensive to get stuff out of the Strait of Hormuz? Why does whatever product that comes from there 5 times more expensive? Well, kids, when we were a kid, the greatest president ever went after Iran and, gave them control of the strait. That's what the story could say. So you can see why Donald Trump is so anxious to control it. He's talking about now them charging tolls. This is a problem. Have we opened up a quagmire in Iran that we can't get out of? Are these bigger geopolitical concerns over power way bigger deals than what anybody who comes from a business negotiation background would ever consider? Who wouldn't want $300 billion? Well, not when you've got trillions of dollars on the line controlling that strait. All right, guys, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. We got right down an hour and a half. I'd like to keep these to an hour, but it is hard. I'd have to actually cut out some information. Maybe we should do it. I don't know. We'll see. Ron, everything is fine. We're still here talking. Funny thing to say. Absolutely. All right, guys, thanks for joining us. Don't forget to check out 1776live.us. Join us for an Ignite presentation on Thursdays at 4:30 Pacific time. And of course, you can always go check out leftbehindandwithout.org, make a contribution or a donation, a gift to children with incarcerated parents that are in need. They are getting ready for their Christmas blitz. Yes, it's early enough to start thinking about Christmas. And then, of course, don't forget politicalremodel.com and take